Clara stood at the small train station with dry lips, tired eyes, and only one coin left in her cloth bag. The last piece of value she owned after selling her wedding ring, her sewing machine, and the last sack of oats from the barn her husband died in 2 winters ago. And now, dressed in a worn black dress that used to be blue, she waited with no plan, no ticket, and no food. Just standing under the burning sky of a dry western town where people passed her without looking, where even the preacher had stopped asking if she was all right. And just as the last train whistle blew and steam poured over the platform, a tall cowboy with sunburned skin and bleeding knuckles rushed down the wooden steps, limping hard, searching his coat pockets for a coin he didn't have, his hat crooked, his eyes filled with fire and desperation, until he turned toward the station agent and said, "Please, I need to get on that train. I'm not too late." But the man just folded his arms and shook his head. No pay, no ride, and Clara, without thinking, walked forward and pressed her only coin into the cowboy's palm, her hand shaking, saying nothing, not even asking who he was or what he needed, just turned away, expecting nothing, because she had already given up on expecting. And he stood there stunned, then grabbed her wrist gently and said, "You'll be remembered for this," before leaping up onto the train as it rolled out, vanishing like smoke into the hills. And Clara stayed behind with nothing, not even a name to hold on to, just the wind, the heat, and the ache in her chest. So she walked to the back alley behind the old stable where her husband once shoveled hay, curled up behind a stack of wooden crates, and cried herself to sleep, weak from hunger and grief, wondering if she'd wake up again or just fade into the day like all the forgotten widows in forgotten towns. But the next morning, just after sunrise, the whole town shook from the sound of hooves pounding down the main road, 10 riders storming in like a dust storm, led by a man in a long black coat with a silver band across his hat and scars on his face. And townsfolk froze as these riders pulled up at the station, barking orders, posting letters, and asking for a woman named Clara. And when no one answered, they split up into groups, one of them heading straight toward the stables, and the black-coated man dismounted, walked in slow, then knelt beside Clara as she blinked awake and flinched, too afraid to speak, until he said, "You gave a coin to my brother yesterday, and that coin got him on the train that helped him stop a gang that was about to rob and kill 3 families near Pine Ridge." And Clara just stared, still not understanding, until the man snapped his fingers and another rider handed her a leather sack full of silver coins and a deed. Then the man said, "He promised to repay you, and so do I. This store and all its stock is yours." And they took her, stunned and weak, straight to the general store, handed her the keys, and walked away, leaving the town silent with shock as the woman they had all ignored now stood behind the counter of the finest building in town. And still Clara could not believe it, could not move or speak, until a young girl ran in barefoot, asking for bread. And Clara reached behind the shelf, handed her the biggest loaf, and said, "Take it, no charge." And from that day on, people saw her differently, not as the sad woman in black but as the woman who gave without asking, who helped without reason. And in return, the world gave back something she thought was lost forever: dignity, purpose, and a second chance. And weeks passed as she cleaned, stocked, and opened her doors to widows and orphans alike, giving credit when no one else would, teaching young girls how to read price sheets and young boys how to sweep and repair boots, until her shop was more than just a place to buy flour. It became a place of safety, a place of change. And word spread through the county of the widow with the strong eyes and the soft heart. But peace never lasts in places where greed rides with a gun. And one night, just before closing, 2 men stumbled in, drunk and red-faced, their boots still dusty from the rail lines, and Clara recognized the tattoo on one of their necks, the same symbol printed on the wanted posters for the gang the marshal had caught. Only these 2 had escaped, and now they were here, holding bottles and shouting, knocking over shelves, saying, "Where is she, the one who helped him? We'll teach her what it means to take sides." And Clara, scared but steady, reached below the counter and grabbed the shotgun her husband had left behind, pumped it once, pointed it steady, and said, "I helped a man get on a train. If that bothers you, you're welcome to leave. If not, you better pray I miss." but they laughed and stepped forward anyway, until the door burst open and 5 riders stepped in, rifles drawn, led by the black-coated man himself, Marshal Colt Mercer, who said, "We warned you boys, and now it's time to answer." And they were dragged out, kicking and cursing, their threats drowned out by the thud of boots and the cold iron of cuffs. And once again, Clara stood behind her counter as a woman who chose right over safety, who stood tall when others might have knelt. And from that day on, the marshal made it known that any man or woman who harmed Clara would answer to him. And people listened, because Colt Mercer was not just a lawman, he was a man who kept his word. And though Clara refused to take charity, he visited often, each time bringing supplies, help, and news of his brother, the man she had given her coin to, now a decorated hero who had stopped the rail heist and saved 6 lives. And when he returned 6 months later, healed and strong, he walked into her store, placed a gold coin on the counter, and said, "Now it's your turn to ask for something." But Clara just smiled and pushed the coin back, saying, "I got more than I ever asked for." And from that day, he wrote her a letter every week, and she wrote back, and slowly something new began to grow. Not just friendship, but trust, and maybe even love. And by the end of that year, Clara's store had grown into a small trade post. The stable had been rebuilt, and every child who passed her porch got a candy stick and a lesson in honesty. And when a fire broke out on the edge of town one hot night, it was Clara who led the bucket line. It was Clara who opened her store as shelter, and it was Clara who stayed behind when others fled, pulling a crying boy from the smoke, burning her hands in the process. And when the smoke cleared and the boy was safe, the mayor himself declared, "She ain't just a shopkeeper, she's the heart of this town." And people clapped, and some cried, and Clara just smiled with bandaged hands and said, "Sometimes it just takes one coin." And that winter, when the crops failed and supplies ran low, it was Clara who gave out food without asking for pay. And though some took advantage, most didn't. And one by one, folks came back to repay her, some with coins, some with work, some with music or stories or apples or warm boots. And every evening she'd sit on the porch with the marshal's letters in her lap, reading them again and again, until one day he rode back, dismounted without a word, and handed her a ring, not gold or silver, but iron, carved with her name, and asked her if she'd walk beside him for whatever came next. And she said yes, not because she needed saving, but because she was finally ready to live again. And years passed, and people still came to her store not just for goods but for wisdom, and children knew her as Miss Clara, the woman who never turned away a hungry mouth. And when the marshal died, old and proud, she buried him beside her husband, and every Sunday placed a single coin between their stones. And when she too passed, quiet and full of peace, the town held a week of silence. And people from every county rode in, each one holding a coin they'd once been given by her, and they dropped them in a jar at her grave, until the coins overflowed and filled 4 jars, and someone carved into her headstone, "She gave her last coin," and in return, the world gave back. And that is how a poor widow who once had nothing became the most remembered woman in the West.